Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. Shocking updates today in the driver market. Rumour had it that there was one key driver Cadillac had in mind to be their number one driver effectively next season, and the contract, some said, was already signed. Today's rumour though suggests from multiple sources that yes, Cadillac have signed a contract now with the driver for next season, but it is not necessarily the man that we originally expected. Very much enjoy to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. Talking of Ferrari, let's dive into a couple of things happening over there. Felipe was pretty critical of Hamilton, let's say playing himself down as he did during the Hungarian Grand Prix weekend, saying, they got to replace me and all of this stuff. Vasseur says he's very self-critical. He's always extreme in his reaction. Sometimes he is too hard on the car, sometimes on himself. The message that he sends out only make things worse. But they did confirm, Ferrari and Vasseur, that what happened in China has effectively cooked their season. Now, this is no surprise. But since the disqualification in the race, every weekend Ferrari are giving a safety margin. Now, to be fair, let's be real, other teams also must be giving a safety margin to make sure they don't destroy the floor and have it wear too much. So I think from Ferrari's perspective, it is a little bit of like, oh, well, that disqualification compromised our season. If that hadn't have happened, then we would have been fine. It's like, well, no, you designed a car that was problematic, first of all, and it's not like the teams don't understand that they need to make sure their ride height is within a safety margin, otherwise they're going to get disqualified. Other teams are doing it too, so I don't really buy the idea that Ferrari are trying to sell there. There was another bit of drama around Ferrari. So one of their former drivers, this man, Arturo Mazzario, who used to be an F1 driver for Ferrari way back in the day, he's now in his 80s, and he had a few things to say about the situation. Now, does he really know anything? You know, I find these comments all rather fascinating, but this is what the guy has to say. And it goes as follows. Ferrari probably need to change driver, said Hamilton. In my opinion, Hamilton's arrival in Maranello was a commercial operation, the Italian told Gazzetta dello Sport. As far as I know, 90% of the employees at Ferrari did not approve of this decision. Now, I find this very hard to believe because the board wanted him on. They said yes. There seemed to be a general feeling around the factory and the team that this is particularly exciting for Ferrari and for the engineers to get to work. I mean, first of all, if you're on Hamilton's side of the garage, or formerly Sainz's side of the garage, yeah, you might have your opinions about Hamilton as a driver, but surely you're going to be excited about the possibility of working with statistically the most successful driver in the history of the sport, and undoubtedly one of the most talented drivers that we have ever seen. There's no, like, you know, at least that part of the team is surely going to be excited about it. There was a general feeling that the engineers are pretty happy as well. I don't know, what do you guys think about this? I can see that maybe what was displayed publicly when Hamilton joined, going around the factory shaking everyone's hand, everyone was buzzing about it. You know, look, maybe there was some commercial part of that, and maybe it's not like everyone there was going to be happy about it, but I have a hard time believing that 90% of employees were not happy / excited / did not approve of this development that happens. Look, I mean, it could be as high as like 40 to 50%, but I don't see it possibly going to be 90. But anyway, that's what he says based on his sources. Not really sure where he's got them from, but he says, and then when a driver doesn't feel valued or an integral part of the group to achieve a goal, he loses motivation. Why go crazy to gain 3/10 while still remaining on the third row? The 82-year-old is adamant that it's not over though for Hamilton. It's not over. He's just got to keep waiting for the right opportunity. He'll only risk when necessary, not for 8th position, and if he ever wanted to leave, he would find another team. But I'm not sure that he necessarily wants to at this point in his career. It's not a Charles Leclerc situation, who's still got to prove that he's a champion, and says that it's a bit ironic, that statement, but of course this position is not acceptable. It seems to me that Lewis feels like someone who has already been destroyed by Ferrari. So anyway, there you go. You bring up the, you bring the boys into the interview room. You never know what's going to be said. Now, Ferrari also made a few comments on the trajectory of the development for this season, exactly what they've been working on. Vasseur just made a few indications that the suspension has been a crucial challenge. It's all about 2026 at this point, and Vasseur basically says that the upgrades teams abroad have been pretty much entirely with 2026 in mind. There is benefit to understanding the suspension in greater detail, the way you might use that for next year. There is benefit to understanding the cooling of the brakes and what that does to the tyres for next year. there's all these things that teams have been playing around with, and that's what Vasseur says, that we all, and I think it's true for McLaren, and it's true for us, and it's true for Mercedes, put a lot of effort on what you can carry over. It means that a lot about this season's development is about suspension. It's a lot about the brake system. It's a lot about the items that you will carry over for next year. Some things will be zero, but with suspension, as soon as you understand something, it's a good step forward for next year. It's not a coincidence that all the teams, if you look, have done this. The development of Mercedes this year, mainly around suspension. McLaren also, we are doing the same. So then they talk about the brakes and, of course, trying to understand exactly what McLaren are cooking up with their cooling and to see if the other teams can figure something like that out. I wouldn't be massively surprised to see some tweaks in this regard. We know that from an aero perspective, nothing really is expected to change between now and the end of the season, apart from a Haas, we think, bringing an upgrade for the US Grand Prix in Texas. But there is a feeling that other teams might still try and experiment with some ideas in the cooling of their brake discs, because McLaren, if the other teams don't figure out what McLaren are doing there and how they've been able to gain this big advantage, keeping especially the rear tyre temperatures in check, as we believe they're doing with some clever mechanization or whatever of what's happening at the back of the car, if other teams don't figure that out, they could still be at a major disadvantage next season. So we might end up seeing whether there's more developments on that. But let's talk about the driver market, because it's been quite fascinating in recent weeks. There's been talk about Lawson gathering steam, let's say, at Racing Bulls, whether he could get back into the Red Bull. The general rumour is, though, that's not going to be happening. Isaac Hadjar, we know, is getting linked there as well. Racing Bulls don't want to let him go. Hadjar says that he's just got to be a bit more consistent. A few too many mistakes have been creeping in recent rounds, putting him at risk of not falling behind Lawson, but to be fair, in the championship standings right now, they're actually in a very similar position. There was also talk the other day about whether Alex Albon would be considered by Red Bull in the event that they need another driver. In 2027, this is not an impossibility that the team may need a new number one, because Max might leave. And it's probably not going to be Yuki. It's probably not going to be Hadjar at that point in his career. And it's probably not going to be Lawson. So at that point, unless they're going to put Arvid Lindblad in the car and he's just an absolute megastar, they're going to need, if Max leaves in 27, to sign somebody from another team to try and fill that gap. You would expect it would be George Russell if Max was to go to Mercedes. But does Russell want to do that, right? Like, if I'm George, depending what happens next year, but if I'm George Russell and I get kicked out by Toto for 2027 by, for Max Verstappen, I'm joining Aston Martin, I think. I don't think I'm joining Red Bull, especially because in the event where Max were to leave Red Bull Racing, that would imply their competitive prospects are pretty dire. Otherwise, he wouldn't leave. So you don't really want to join the team in that circumstance. So if I'm Russell, I'm thinking about that. If I'm Albon, I'm also thinking about that. But yeah, Williams is saying that he's a completely different beast to what he was during the Red Bull spell. But we know that Red Bull have at least engaged in trying to get him back, although Albon has shut down any of those attempts basically every single time. But let's talk about the driver market for Cadillac, because this is the team that's a complete unknown. There are quite a few seats on the grid not yet technically filled, but we know that Mercedes is going to be George and Kimi. It's just a matter of when that gets confirmed and what the terms of those deals are. But for Cadillac, numerous options on the board they could go for. There was talk about Zhou Guanyu. There was talk about Mick Schumacher. There was talk about even Alex Dunn recently. There was talk about Jack Crawford. Talk initially, of course, about Colton Herta getting a drive as well. Zach Sullivan, right? There's a few drivers that have been thrown around. But the key candidates in the last couple of weeks were Perez and Drugovich. Now, Planet F1 said, this was back on the 12th of August, so just over a week ago, that Perez has struck an agreement with Cadillac for 2026. He's closing in on a return. This is basically happening, is what was said at the time. Now, slightly before that, back in the middle of July, there was talk that both Perez and Bottas were in advancing contract talks. So there's been a lot of debate on what they would do with their lineup. Would they elect to go for two experienced heads, experienced drivers to lead the way, or would they prefer to have a younger driver in the car? By the 12th of August, the feeling was shifting to that maybe they're looking to do the latter and actually having one of Bottas Perez and then somebody else instead. The way that looked over the last week was that actually it looked like a Perez-Drugovich combination was one of the more likely. There was lots of talk emerging about, well, one of the F2 rookies or one of the F2 winners, former F2 winner, is in the conversation, and we looked through the options. The only one that really made sense was Drugovich to be considered. Now, for Cadillac, they're not going to be the most competitive team next year, you would think. They're going to have Ferrari power, but at least for the first couple of years while they build up their team to their own General Motors engine at some point that's coming in the future, they're talking about 2029 to start building their own engines. Maybe at that point they can try and be a competitive force. But until then, it's about being in Formula One, gaining the benefits of doing so, having a team that's massively valuable in the process. And of course, from a commercial perspective, you might think, well, Perez brings a lot of interest, a lot of money, a lot of jersey sales from Mexico. And then, for example, getting another Brazilian driver on the grid in Drugovich would also be very attractive. There was also good reason to talk about someone like Zhou Guanyu, solid driver, relatively dependable driver, not going to crash it, not going to be especially fast, appeals to the Chinese market. But, you know, it's interesting culturally because, yeah, Zhou does appeal to the Chinese market, but just generally, because Zhou isn't winning and because Zhou's not a winning team, if Zhou was the best driver on the best team, it would be crazy in China. But it's because he is not winning, you know, the, let's say, cultural appeal is less significant. So it's not like GM can sign Zhou and all of a sudden have a load of Chinese fans chomping at the bit. Culturally, it doesn't maybe work like that as much as it does with other cultures, but that's just my kind of feeling on it. You guys may disagree. But anyway, Drugovich was talked about as being an option here. Alongside Perez, Drugovich is getting linked to that other seat. But all of a sudden, things have kind of taken a little bit of a turn. This again was Planet F1 doubling down and saying, look, we're pretty sure Perez has an agreement to join Cadillac. Now, what's interesting about this is that this may well be true, that he has reached an agreement. That does not necessarily mean that he has signed a contract. An agreement may be in place. There may be other discussions still ongoing. Maybe even with Alpine is a possibility as well. There has been talk about whether obviously Briatore could decide to go a different direction and make some serious changes to his lineup there. I wouldn't be that surprised to see a guy like Perez linked to that team. Actually, links like that have been recently made. But today, the time it seems has turned. Sergio Rodriguez says this, and he's pretty good with this type of stuff in general. Finnish flag emoji, American flag emoji, tick emoji, check mark emoji, whatever you want to call it. And then he says Mexican flag emoji. I'm not going to read it out again, but you know what I'm trying to say, right? So, Finnish driver signed with an American team, Mexican driver signed with an American team coming soon. It's only a matter of time, ... whatever. So this is kind of interesting and has, if this is true, kind of come out of nowhere, because the prevailing wisdom was that they may have chosen Perez over Bottas. And from a commercial appeal perspective, I understand that decision. If I had to choose who I think is the better driver, I think I am leaning Bottas's way. I think that, you know, Bottas and Perez could actually be a pretty excellent partnership. They were both the sister drivers, or whatever you want to say, the second drivers to Hamilton and Verstappen in that legendary season. I tend to think Bottas is a bit stronger. It'd be exciting to see how they fare in the same car. We know that Bottas' qualifying, of course, has always been pretty strong, and his last couple of years at Sauber were not exactly ideal, but was also largely because the car was pretty atrocious. You put Bottas in this year's Sauber, I think it looks like a very different story of that team, in the same way as we know Hülkenberg's doing a great job over there as it stands. But it didn't seem that likely that they would put both of these experienced guys in the car. But in terms of driver development, not for the drivers but for the car, this could be massively important, right? Having two guys who have been there and done it, won races, won championships, not, you know, drivers' championships, but won constructors' championships, to know what a winning environment kind of looks like, and to get Bottas's perspective on that, to get Perez's perspective on that, to get the feedback to the car, could be very valuable, and potentially more valuable than bringing up a younger driver who may have lots of potential, but might not be the guy that they need right now. If they are on a bit of a longer term horizon, maybe there is good logic to say, you know what, signing two more experienced drivers makes sense. So Racing News 365 are talking about this. This is Graham Loden, the effectively top guy, team principal over there, but they've reached a deal with Bottas. So in Perez's sake, apparently they've reached an agreement, but with Bottas, it seems the deal is done, and they will be signing this. Either they already have, or it's happening happening in the very near future indeed. So Bottas is back. This is the poll they did, 3,500 votes in this. Is he a perfect fit or not? Yes, he's a perfect fit, 88%. No, there are better options than Bottas, 12%. You know, I'm in the former camp here. I think Bottas is an excellent fit for what Cadillac needs as, you know, a driver who can absolutely do a job and I think provide a lot of value to that team. So it looks like not only have they reached an agreement, but maybe it's gone one step further and they've signed the contract. And Planet F1 are saying, look, they've reached an agreement here with Bottas, which means that it feels like the most likely outcome is for it to be a Bottas-Perez partnership next year at Cadillac, which would be quite something. This, of course, is Bottas's record of Q3. We know that he made Q3 every single race he competed for Mercedes in, which is a remarkable record. Okay, you could look at it a certain way and say, well, back in many of these seasons, it wasn't that impressive. The car was so much better that you had to be so far off the pace to not make it, which of course is true, but still, the consistency of executing every single time, every single weekend was very impressive, and of course rounded out his season at Mercedes, went to Alfa Romeo, became Sauber, took a year out here to help Mercedes with developing Kimi Antonelli, and then might be back in the car again. So I think Bottas is the right man for the job. The interesting thing is, as people have been pointing out here, that on the 8th of December 2024, Bottas got a 5 grid drop penalty for causing a collision. Now, it's pretty funny to think about in hindsight because he then never raced again, in the same way that Button still has a penalty to serve if he ever returns to Formula 1. The same will apply for Bottas. Now, this isn't a big deal, right? This isn't going to say, oh, well, Cadillac, are we going to be able to win the championship if Bottas has got a 5-place pen? You know, they're not going to care, are they, really? For Cadillac, this realistically is probably the difference between qualifying P17 and starting in P22 at the back. But it is what it is. So, yeah, the judgment was made after Abu Dhabi to give him, it was meant to be a drive-through penalty and 3 penalty points are warranted, but because he retired, they're giving him a grid drop, a 5-place grid drop for the next time that he can participate. 3 penalty points, he went up to 5 for the 12-month period, but of course that 12-month period is now long expired, and it looks like Bottas is going to be getting a drive at Cadillac where he will take a 5-place grid drop at his first time of asking. But intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think this is the way to go if you're Cadillac F1? Will they exceed expectations? And also, is it the right move for Bottas? I think for Cadillac, it makes a lot of sense. For Bottas, is it the best option? We've said a couple of times, if Alpine is there as a consideration, do you go for that instead? I got to assume by this happening that maybe that's not an option, because if you get the opportunity to go to Alpine, you probably would do so because they're going to be Mercedes powered next year. Yes, it would be controversial, but it gives you more chance of, you know, winning points, trying to win a race again. But maybe Bottas is at a point of his career when, you know, he's won his races, he's won his championships, and he'd want an environment where he can have a lot of impact, but also it's a little bit more chill than it was at Mercedes. And certainly if you join Alpine, you've got to be ready for some politics, ladies and gentlemen. Whereas Cadillac could be a good opportunity to still drive in Formula 1, try and help a team make some serious progress, but also not be in a particularly stressful environment like Bottas did struggle with when he was alongside Hamilton at Mercedes. So very much enjoyed your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.